Now, Ibrahim Traoré has led Burkina Faso to its biggest gold year on record.
Now, Ibrahim Traoré has led Burkina Faso to its biggest gold production year on record. At first glance, it sounds like another IMF headline. $33.2 million approved. A program review completed. Cautious optimism expressed. Routine. Technical. Easy to scroll past. But pause. Why would a country battling insecurity in the Sahel suddenly record 94 metric tons of gold, the highest output in its history? Why would its current account flip from deficit to surplus at this exact moment? Why would climate financing be approved not as emergency relief, but as a long-term strategy? And why does 94 tons of gold feel heavier than it sounds? Burkina Faso is usually framed through fragility, conflict, drought, deficits. Not surplus, not momentum, yet something has shifted, not just in production but in policy, posture, and perception. This is not only about gold prices or IMF technical reviews. It is about control, leverage, and direction. The question is no longer whether Burkina Faso can survive pressure. The question is whether it has begun converting pressure into power. In 2025, Burkina Faso extracted 94 metric tons of gold, a historic peak. Gold itself is not new. The country has long been one of Africa's major producers. The difference now is not just volume. It is management. For decades, Africa's mining story followed a predictable cycle. International companies extracted resources, exports increased, GDP ticked upward, yet deficits persisted. Revenue leakages diluted impact. Public finances remained tight. Minerals left the ground, but leverage never fully accumulated. That paradox defined many resource-rich economies. Under the current administration, production expanded, but so did oversight. Mining sector reforms strengthened state supervision. Licensing procedures were scrutinized. Governance integrity became measurable, because producing more gold without tightening the system only magnifies leakage. But increasing production while improving oversight changes fiscal gravity. Global gold prices helped, yes, but prices alone do not transform economies. What matters is capture, how much of the export value translates into domestic revenue. Improved oversight means predictable royalties.
Transparent licensing reduces investor uncertainty.
Stronger governance protects public revenue. These are mechanics, not ideology. And mechanics turn commodities into policy tools. 94 tons alone is impressive. 94 tons combined with governance reform is transformative. That alignment helps explain why macroeconomic indicators began moving together rather than contradicting each other. Then something even more unexpected happened. Burkina Faso's current account shifted into surplus, projected at 1.1% of GDP in 2025, and 0.8% in 2026. For years, the country operated under familiar developing economy pressure. Imports outpacing exports, external financing gaps, and foreign exchange vulnerability. Gold exports were strong, but structural imbalances remained. In 2025, that equation tilted. When exports rise and revenue capture improves, the arithmetic changes. A current account surplus means the country earns more from the outside world than it spends. That reduces emergency borrowing. It strengthens external reserves. It improves negotiating power with lenders and investors. A deficit forces a reaction. A surplus allows planning. Planning creates strategy. This shift aligned with fiscal discipline. The government targeted a deficit ceiling of 3.5% of GDP while protecting social and health expenditures. Inflation remained contained. Debt was described as sustainable. These technical phrases signal credibility. They tell institutions and markets that macroeconomic management is not spiraling. In a region often associated with structural deficits, a projected surplus disrupts expectations. It suggests that commodity advantage, when paired with governance reform, can break familiar loops. But surplus is not a trophy. It is a test. Will it hold if gold prices fluctuate? Can fiscal discipline survive rising security costs? Will revenue be reinvested productively?
International institution notiste.
The IMF completed the fourth review of Burkina Faso's extended credit facility and disbursed $33.2 million. More importantly, it approved $124.3 million under a resilience and sustainability facility through 2027. This was not emergency rescue funding. It was forward-looking financing. The IMF's continued engagement signals that macro management remains credible despite security strain. Several governance diagnostic recommendations were completed, including strengthening mining license integrity, a critical reform in resource-driven economies. This changes tone. Instead of being treated as too unstable for structured financing, Burkina Faso received medium-term resilience support. But the most strategic shift may not be gold. It may be climate adaptation. Nearly 80% of Burkina Faso's population depends on subsistence agriculture. Climate shocks are not peripheral, they are foundational. Drought affects food supply, inflation, migration, and security simultaneously. For years, climate vulnerability in the Sahel triggered emergency aid after crises occurred. The new resilience financing reframes that pattern. It funds irrigation systems, agricultural adaptation, disaster risk financing, and long-term food stability. This is not a humanitarian reaction. It is macroeconomic insulation. When food imports decrease, foreign exchange pressure eases. When agricultural output stabilizes, inflation moderates. When disaster shocks are financially buffered, deficits do not spike suddenly. Climate policy becomes economic strategy. There is also a social dimension. Rural instability fuels urban pressure. Urban pressure fuels political tension. Agricultural resilience reduces migration cycles and economic desperation. Resilience quietly reinforces security. Gold strengthens fiscal space. Surplus strengthens buffers. Climate adaptation reduces structural vulnerability. Together, these shifts reshape national posture. For decades, Burkina Faso was introduced through fragility metrics, poverty rates, conflict maps, and aid dependency charts. Now, growth projections near 5% for 2026 appear alongside surplus language. Governance reforms are acknowledged formally. Adaptation is funded proactively. Technical changes alter identity. When a country repeatedly hears it is fragile, policymakers operate defensively. Investors hesitate. Citizens temper expectations. But when macro indicators improve, posture changes. Breathing space changes psychology. And psychology influences negotiation. Burkina Faso still faces serious security challenges. That reality remains. But fiscal discipline combined with structured reform moves the conversation from survival to strategy. Young generations notice. The old cycle, resource extraction, borrowing, austerity, frustration, feels deeply familiar across Africa. When charts move differently, imagination expands. But history warns, commodity booms often fade. Gold rises, revenues swell, optimism builds. Then prices fall, governance weakens, and cycles reset. Burkina Faso stands at that fork. The difference between a moment and a trajectory is institutional depth. Will mining oversight remain strict under pressure? Will revenue mobilization expand beyond gold? Will fiscal consolidation hold if political demands intensify? Will climate funding produce measurable agricultural stability? Transformation is not gold itself. It is the shift from reactive governance to anticipatory governance. Reactive governance responds after a crisis. Anticipatory governance builds buffers before shock arrives. If reforms continue, if revenue capture remains transparent, if fiscal space funds productive investment, if adaptation stabilizes agriculture, then something rare will have occurred. A resource economy strengthening without collapsing into volatility. That outcome would matter beyond Ouagadougou. It would challenge the assumption that security strain blocks macro discipline. It would show that reform under pressure is possible. But sustainability requires diversification. Gold cannot remain the single engine. Agricultural productivity must rise. Infrastructure must deepen domestic capacity. Institutions must outlast political cycles. True sovereignty is not tied to one leader or one boom. It is tied to systems. This is the defining chapter for Ibrahim Traoré's administration, not rhetoric but permanence. If reforms embed into bureaucratic culture,